One of my favorite ways to create more interesting photos is to get closer to my subject. And in doing that, I'll often eliminate or reduce distractions and create that minimalist look that I tend to prefer. However, I'm often limited in how close I can get to my subjects by the minimum focusing distance of the lens. But today's video is another prime time video. We're going to review and discuss the 80 millimeter macro lens from Fujinon, the XF80 f2.8R LMOISWR. It's always a mouthful with Fuji. So this lens will let me get lots closer to my subject and create that minimalist look that I often like. So buckle up, we're gonna talk about this, and here we go. So this video will be like my other lens review videos, not super technical. I'm not going to talk a lot about specs. That's been done before, but it will be more how it works for me, my personal opinion, and at the end you will see a slideshow with some sample photos. Quick note and disclaimer before we begin. This lens has been loaned to me by Fujifilm USA, and then will be returned to them at the end of my 30-day time with it. Fujifilm USA has not had any requests specific about what I do with the lens, and they don't get any review of this review before it gets published. So I thought you should know that. So here's what we're going to do in this review. We're going to talk about some of the physical characteristics of this lens. We'll talk about performance of this lens, image quality, have a conclusion and summary at the end, including the famous or infamous donut rating. And then at the very end of the video will be some sample photos set to music in what we call a slideshow. So please use the chapter markers to jump to the spot that most interests you. So let's talk about some of the physical characteristics of this lens. First, it is a beefy, hefty, solid lens. It is dense, it is well made, it feels really good. The focus ring moves really smoothly. The aperture ring also moves really smoothly, almost too smoothly. I've bumped it a couple of times when I didn't expect it, and the aperture was at a different value than I left it, both from just holding the camera, the lens, as well as in and out of the camera bag. So something to be aware of there. This lens size comparison to other Fuji lenses is it's larger than the 90 millimeter f2, which is probably its physically closest lens you might think about. It's also even larger than the 16 to 55 f2.8 by a fair bit. It's also heavier than both of those lenses. And then last but not least, let's throw in, if you're used to prime lenses and you're used to the Fuji f2 primes, this is lots larger. Lots larger. So this is compared to the 50 millimeter f2. The minimum focusing distance of this lens is a little less than 10 inches. That combined with the length of the lens itself at around 6 inches means you can get really close to your subject. So then you get that one-to-one magnification that's pretty spectacular. I often forgot that I could get that close. I'm just not used to it. Plus, I don't often shoot with a tripod, and you really, when you're that close, have to have a tripod. So my magnification often isn't at the one-to-one. I'm not at the minimum focusing distance. Again, this lens was a learning experience for me, but I really enjoyed that I just could always get closer with this lens. There are two switches on this lens, and the two switches are for image stabilization, to turn that on or off, the OIS, optical image stabilization. And the other switch is for focusing distance. As a macro lens, and when you're working really close to your subject, sometimes you only want to tell the lens, just look in this range for focusing, and that'll speed things up. Or if you want a medium distance or the full range of focus, so that is available via those switches. Regarding performance of autofocus, I found this lens to be very fast in autofocus, very quiet, very accurate. Even when you're in the full focusing range distance and you go from something far away to something really close, it gets pretty quick. I don't know that you need it to be any faster than that in my experience. It's just quick and accurate. So I also found the optical image stabilization to work as expected. Most of these systems are good for 4 or 5 extra stops, which means for me, most of the time, 1/60, 1/30th of a second, I'm okay, as long as I can get good technique in holding the camera and supporting the rest of my aging body. So yeah, tripods are your friend, especially as you get really close to subjects, because any movement, up or down, left or right, forward or back, will be amplified, even with good image stabilization. So let's move on to talking about image quality, which is the main job of a lens. So as with my experience with other Fujinon lenses, this 80 millimeter macro is awesome. I also was able to use it as a short telephoto lens with its full frame equivalent of 120 millimeter focal length. And in my experience, I experienced minimal fringing or vignetting. And when it was wide open, yes, there's some vignetting, but it's not the kind you notice unless you're taking pictures of brick walls or graph paper for lens reviews. That's about the only time you, at least for my style and level of pickiness, I noticed any vignetting. And then just stopping down to f2.8, f4, f4 or 5.6 helps remove most of that. So, or software. Interesting comment I want to add here is about Sunstars. I had the opportunity, I was out taking some photos in downtown Bellevue, Washington, to have the sun reflected off an office building, and it looks like this. So the Sunstars are nice. This was at f22, I believe, and they have an interesting characteristic to them. Notice how they're kind of doubled up. There's the full one and there's a half one, and then on the half of the full ones, there's almost 2 beams that connect. So it's a Sunstar with lots of personality. You also do get some flaring here, but that's to be expected. Oftentimes anyway. I like the characteristic of this Sunstar. I think it's kind of cool. Got, again, lots of personality. I'm not afraid of lenses with personality and quirks or things that are done a little differently than other lenses. So that's my opinion. Your mileage, of course, will vary. So I am not, as I have mentioned, a pixel peeper, but I am a bokeh appreciator. Bokeh, blurry background stuff appreciator. And my experience with this lens is it does a very nice job with that background blurriness. It's soft, it's got no coloring, no kind of obvious behaviors that detract from the subject, with one kind of exception. Most of the time, the blurry background objects appear as expected. They're just nice and soft and fluffy. However, if you are close to your subject with this lens and the background is relatively far away, the blurry background elements, the balls of light, if you will, change a little bit. And they become more oval shape, especially if you're wide open at 2.8, more cat's eye kind of looking. Especially as you get near the edge of the frame. So here's what that looks like. At f2.8, you can see on the left here, those blurry balls of light, that's what I call bokeh, are more oval, cat's eye shaped, and as you stop down to f5.6, f8, in this situation where I'm focused on this close subject with the background far away, they become more round, which is kind of atypical behavior for how bokeh is rendered. Usually the more closed down you are, the more angular the bokeh becomes. So just be aware of that in your photographing with this lens. So let's move on to the conclusion, summary, and donut rating that you've been waiting for. So as the self-appointed president of the Zoom Lens Club, I'm used to using Zoom lenses, and every time I pick up a prime, I have to remember the difference in using a prime. And those differences help me be more creative oftentimes, which I'm learning to really appreciate. And one of the things I really enjoyed using about this lens is it's two things. One, as a medium telephoto, that's kind of my sweet spot of where I like to be anyway. And then the second thing I really like about this lens is it has a dual function as that macro lens. It lets me get closer and closer and closer to my subject, even probably closer than I think I need to be. And it doesn't get in the way of me creating those abstract kind of minimalist photos that I tend to enjoy. So if you're used to using prime lenses, especially Fuji's smaller 2.0 primes, this lens is going to feel really different. It is heavy, it's dense, it is noticeable when it's on your camera. Even as someone who's used a lot of zoom lenses, you do feel the weight, especially if you haven't picked it up for a minute. You're like, oh, that's heavy. So, but once you're used to it and it's in your hand, it's good to go. It feels well balanced on the camera. I think this lens would be great for a photographer who primarily uses primes. It gets you that longer focal length, plus you get the added benefit of macro capability. For someone like me who uses zoom lenses, this is also a great lens to add to your kit, giving you that fast prime capability, plus again, that ability to get super close with the macro function. So it's a win-win lens. I think lots of folks would benefit from it. Fuji lenses are known for their image quality, and this 80mm macro lives up to those expectations. Fuji lenses are also known for having inconsistent stiffness in the aperture rings. Some are too loose, some are too tight, some are just right. This 80mm aperture ring is the loosest of the aperture rings I think I've experienced on Fuji lenses. I don't know if that's just on my sample because it's been a loaner and maybe driven hard, but that's my one major detractor from this lens. And so that's why I will give this 4.5 out of 5 donuts. Image quality is amazing. Focusing capability is amazing. It's just a great lens, and that macro function just makes me happy. So I hope you have a great time out there creating photos. I hope you stay well, stay healthy, stay safe. And reminder quick that there's a little slideshow coming up at the end. So until we meet again in the next video, and after the slideshow, bye for now.